Good evening, everyone. This is Donna from the LaSalle Public Library, welcoming you to tonight's live virtual program. Before we get started with tonight's gardening feature, I just wanted to remind you again of some of the upcoming programs that are shown on the screen. We have a new one on the 6th of April. The Illinois Humanities Council is sponsoring this program with Erica Holst. She is the curator of history at the Illinois State Museum. And this is an interesting program about behind the beautiful dress, the making cloth and clothing in the 19th century. The production of it, the growing of it, the labor involved in it, from picking the cotton to the factories and the machines that women used, sweatshops, and hand sewing for women who did their own sewing at home. So this is a really interesting program, lots of American history and culture in it. I hope you can join us for that. Next week, we will be featuring the Dixon Waterfowl Refuge. This will be a virtual tour of the wetlands, and our guest speakers will be showing us how the wetlands were restored and show us the flora and fauna that live there today. It is a very interesting place. We've already been out there once this year, and there's always something to see, even in the spring, even when there's stubborn snow still on the ground. Also coming up on April 14th, that's a Wednesday, I'm reminding everyone because it's not our usual day, we will be hosting the John Sanford Fireside Chat with his new book, Ocean Prey. Carl Hyacin will be doing the interview of him, and we hope you can join us for that. Just a reminder, all of LaSalle Public Library programs are free and open to the public, so feel free to share our information with friends. Okay, so for tonight, we are welcoming back Master Gardener Natalie Martin. Tonight's program, Growing Food No Matter the Garden Size, is getting us ready after our program just a few weeks ago about starting seeds. So Natalie will be sharing this with us, and I wanted to let everyone plan for Natalie's upcoming programs about grow your own something. It'll either be beverages or appetizers or your main course dishes. So watch for our upcoming gardening/cooking programs in just a few weeks. So tonight I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to welcome Natalie. Natalie, you can start sharing your screen now, and I
will do that, of course.
All right.
Every single time I do Zoom, I did this with Donna earlier. It's like a new experience for me. It's like a brand new experience, and sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't. So tonight I'm going to get it right. In case you guys have not done a program with me before, I'm Natalie Martin. I am a Master Gardener volunteer over for LaSalle County. We're based out of Ottawa. I'm going to have a little information about the Master Gardener program at the end. A little bit more about me. My background is in environmental and outdoor education. And then I spent some time in recreation programs and events. And now I run my own virtual assisting business out of my house. But tonight we're talking about how you can grow your own food. And so we're going to go through a couple of different things. We're going to go through how much space you might need, how or what kind of strategy you might want, and then we're going to go into what kind of plants you would want to pick for the different spaces that you have in mind. So we're going to kind of go through all that together. We'll shoot for about 45 minutes, and you can feel free at any time to ask some questions, things like that. I will be monitoring the chat as best I can, and do my best to get back and forth between questions and presentation and stuff like that. So feel free to type it in the chat. If you haven't used Zoom before and you aren't familiar with it, the chat is going to be, for you guys, it's probably along the bottom of your screen. There's going to be a little almost like dialogue bubble or word bubble, and that's going to be where you would click on that, and it would allow you to ask a question that we can see over here. So let's jump right in. Why would you want to grow your own food? This is me. This is me this last year. This is my first majorly successful pumpkin growing attempt. I grew those pumpkins in my own yard by accident, really. So, I mean, not 100% by accident. We throw our old pumpkins into our compost pile, and then these ones grew, and they grew these giant pale orange pumpkins. And we kind of, after they started to grow, we maintained them ourselves, but you can see some successful and unsuccessful things in the background here. I do a vertical wall garden. This was our first time doing that. We had some success with that this year. And then we've got some trellis grapes and things like that that we do over here. If you can see my mouse on the screen. So why should you grow your own food? I think the number one reason that most people grow their own food is to save money. Sometimes, you know, if you're buying, especially if you're buying something from starting it from seed, you're spending $3 to $4 on a package of seeds. And that can grow sometimes, you know, 25 to 50 to 100 plants, depending on the types of seeds. So if you think about that and what you would pay retail in a store for something like that, I'll go ahead and turn my camera off so it's not distracting. But so if you think about what you would pay for a specific plant, think of celery. My package of celery that I just started had 100 seeds in it. Some celery hearts, you know, or sometimes $3 to $4 if you're buying them organically. So if you think about growing your own, you can really save quite a bit of money there. So I think that's a lot of the reason that people do grow their own fruits and vegetables. A lot of people want to know exactly what they're eating. You know, they want to know, oh, this had no chemicals on it. I know exactly where it came from. You know, they can follow the whole process from start to finish and know exactly what they're eating and what's in it and what it's made of. And then a sense of accomplishment. Look at this face of this person that grew these 3 giant pumpkins. I was overjoyed. I have been gardening for a long time, but I still get this really big sense of wonder when I'm able to successfully grow something. Gardening is just like making a down payment on hope. You know what I mean? So it's like anytime that you start the process and you put the effort in and then it succeeds, that's such a great feeling. So that's really one of the things I would like. And then I threw in there to keep you off the streets, because really, what else are we doing? You know, let's grow some stuff together, and keep ourselves busy and kind of give ourselves something to work on, you know, to keep things interesting. You might be thinking about your garden and where you would put a garden. You know, there's a couple of different things to think about. And the number one element when you're thinking about growing, especially food crops, would be sun. Where are you going to get the most sun throughout the day? A lot of vegetable and fruit crops will need 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight for the best growth. That doesn't mean that they won't grow if they don't have that much. They just won't be as productive. They may not be as big. You may not get as many blooms or as many rounds of the food that you're growing, because sometimes, you know, you'll pick tomatoes and then more tomatoes will grow on the same plant within the same growing season. So if it doesn't have as much sun, you may not have as much success, but that doesn't mean it won't still succeed. It just may not be as you know, abundant. Do you want to test your soil? If you don't want to go through the process of testing the soil and tilling the soil that you have in your yard, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's important, then you may want to think about raised beds or containers, and that might be the best solution for you. Things like tree roots and shrubs and things like that are going to affect how easily you can dig into the ground where you want to plant. So you'll want to think about that when you're thinking about location. And then, you know, you want to think about soil drainage, you know, where if you have a wet area in your yard, you probably don't want to put your garden there, because especially if you're planting in the ground, because the water will pool there and may oversaturate your plants and rot your roots, or they might just get you know, drowned. And the same thing goes for if it's too well drained, although that's a little bit easier to remedy if you could just have to water more. So think about a lot of those elements when you're thinking about where to put it. If you're thinking about something like containers or raised beds, really the only element that you have to think about is the sunlight. Is you can really pick and choose where you can put it, because you're going to be setting it on top of your ground or in a container that's movable. So that when you're thinking about drainage and tree roots and things like that, really those are only going to affect when you're planting in ground. The reason, and I'll probably go into this a little bit more when we talk about in-ground gardening, but when I talked about testing your soil, our soil contains lots of different things. Some of them are great, things like nutrients, that's what soil's made of. That's what your plant's going to eat, is the nutrients that's in the soil. But things like heavy metals, chemicals, high iron levels, the pH level, those are things that can really affect how your plants would grow. And heavy metals and chemicals can be absorbed right into the plant and into your food. So you want to make sure that if you're growing in ground, you know exactly what your soil is made of. You can get a soil testing kit at the hardware store. You can order one online. It's pretty simple. You just send a soil sample and they'll send you back a report. But whether you want to grow in ground definitely will be determined by what your soil is made of. And it is very tricky to fix that soil. If you think about where you would be planting, 6 to 12 sometimes inches, if you're growing carrots, they're going to grow down into the ground. That's how much soil you would have to lift up and amend, fix, in order to make that in-ground area good. So that's why a lot of folks, especially if they have a rental or they aren't planning on staying in that area forever, a lot of people will choose a raised bed or container garden if they aren't sure about what the soil is, or they don't want to do the kind of effort that would be needed to fix that. So we'll talk about raised bed gardens first. I think this is, fairly popular right now. I shouldn't say popular as in trendy, because there's lots of great things about raised bed gardening. And there's things that, maybe aren't as good either, but it's really it's pretty simple. You're going to take whatever kind of surround you want. Can be wood. Some people use even like bound together sticks. They'll use straw bales, bricks. It doesn't have to even be really that high, but however deep you want your plants in your soil, that's how deep the soil needs to be in your raised bed. So if you're going to grow things like carrots, any sort of root vegetables, you're going to want that soil and that height of your raised bed to be as deep as those plants that you want to grow. But there's some really good benefits to raised beds. You can easily control the water and the nutrients that are inside of it because you're choosing the soil that you put in there. You can choose the compost. You can choose the topsoil and the drainage level and things like that. You can choose those before you go in. And you can buy straight bags from the hardware store of raised bed soil, and that's specifically formatted for raised beds so that it's going to be well drained and it's going to have good nutrients and things like that. Or you can make your own. I make my own. It's a mixture of compost, peat moss, and vermiculite or perlite, or you could use coconut coir, which is the husks of coconuts, that brown kind of fibrous outside. Anything that's going to help with the drainage. So you can really make your own, or you can buy it. Another good thing about raised bed gardening, especially if you are disabled or you have some motion limitations, is the accessibility. You can see this specific raised bed right here is almost 18 inches high. So that's 18 inches. You could sit in a wheelchair or a regular chair and access your fruits and vegetables and plant them while they're still in the raised bed. So that's really nice, especially if someone is older, or even, not old, but disabled, and they can still participate in the garden and still have a nice accessible garden for them. You can see this raised bed that's in this picture. They're surrounded by gravel, and sometimes you'll do paver stones. Sometimes they can get seen like the mulching and things like that. Mine are surrounded by grass, which I don't necessarily recommend, but I sometimes get a little lazy, and a lot of people plant them right on grass. But the thing about grass is it'll grow anywhere. And as soon as it seeds out, those seeds will float and land into your raised bed. And then you have to weed a lot more. So the less plant life that's around your raised bed, the better chance it is of being weed free. The other thing that is a benefit for raised beds is you can really, if you have poor soil quality, you just really can eliminate that from the equation. You can make your raised bed tall enough that your plant will not even access that soil that's down and potentially dangerous. You can put an impermeable layer. If you really have, heavy metals in your soil or chemicals, you can put like a rubber layer, like a liner, just like landscape material, but extra thick, so that there's no way that water can leach through from your actual contaminated soil into your raised bed. So there's some things that you can do to really avoid that kind of contamination. They're really some of the kind of cons, as far as I'll talk about my last pro, which is that it's less restrictive. You really can put it anywhere, as long as it's on your land. You can fit a raised bed. You can have a long skinny raised bed, you can have a big wide open one. But the thing you want to think about when you're thinking about the size of your raised bed is how you're going to access the middle of it. We have 4x4 raised beds, and I love those, but sometimes that stuff to weed into the middle of the raised bed can be a big reach. So that's something to think about when you're building yours. If you are a person that has a hard time reaching or supporting, your torso when you're leaning completely out in front of you, that you might want a longer, skinnier raised bed. So this one in the picture is about 18 inches wide by, I can't tell exactly how long, but it could be 4 to 6 feet long. So you can do it as a border. You can do it as almost a planter bed, like bordering your patio. So there's some really, really great things about it. Cons, they're kind of expensive. They can be kind of expensive. You have to do a lot of front load work and front load cost to make these. Now you can use them year after year, but you have to have the wood or whatever you're going to use. You have to assemble those all together and really have that cost right out the gate that you wouldn't have if you wanted to just till the ground. You also have to buy all of that planting material. Now you can find places that will bring you truckloads of compost and things like that. But when you're first starting those raised beds, it can be pretty costly to get that soil and everything ready to go and started. So think about that. And you may want to start small and just do one small raised bed to get started and build. What's what we've been doing is we build like 1 or 2 more every year so that we can kind of spread that cost over the end. So the big cons, are going to be those costs and those labor costs right up front. I'll talk about a couple of different kinds of raised beds. Here's a very simple one. This one is probably also the cheapest. And this is just adding 6 to 8 inches of tilled soil, whatever your raised bed mix is, just right on top of your ground. You'll probably want to put some sort of landscape material or border or weed barrier so that weeds don't grow up in your planter beds, but you can really just make a mound and plant your plants right in that thing. Now, erosion is a problem. You can, this will settle into this mound, but you will lose stuff off of the edges. So without that barrier, that wood or sticks or bricks or whatever, it will start to kind of erode off the edges as you get through the season, as it rains or, your dog runs through it, which is what happens with my raised beds. That's something to think about when you're thinking about raised beds. But you can just pile dirt on the ground and kind of tamp it down and make this raised bed. Tilling would be really important with this because tilling is just mixing the soil up. So there's lots of air holes. It's not compacted too much. And then you would want to let it rest and settle for about a week or 2 before planting. You will like taper it up on the side, and this will help with erosion. You can see it's sloped on either side. And this will help the water run out and not have it like kind of collapse off the edge. But yeah, you will lose some from all sides on that. These are supported raised beds, and these are not necessarily in the back. You can see there's just boards laid along the sides of it, and then in the front there's some bricks. Now these aren't a specific container. These would be something where you would have that tilled mound like in this picture, and then you would just add some sort of barrier or border around with something to help kind of support it. So this is taking the cheapest one, just the mounded soil, and adding this extra protective layer to kind of keep it in place and kind of make a border of your raised bed. So similar in theory, you would want to build that raised bed and then add the bricks. You can add the bricks or the boards beforehand or after. It's really up to you, but you can add, rot resistant untreated lumber is usually what they'd like you to use, because then the treatment won't leach into the soil. Cedar is preferable because it's just it's the longest lasting, but you can use pine and replace it. Things like people have asked about things like railroad ties as borders. Railroad ties are full of chemicals. And so they're great for things like steps because they last a long time. But if you're going to be putting them near food crops, you really want to think about that, the chemicals that could potentially get into your food. Any sort of treated lumber like pine or things like that, or it's treated with copper, chromium, and arsenic, you can think that could potentially leach into your food as well. And then here's a supported containerized bed. And this is going to be a fully engineered, not engineered makes it sound fancy, but it's just a frame. And you can see it's framed out, it's got the boards meeting, and it's got a support on the inside. And this is just showing that it is supported. It's semi-permanent in that it is going to be staying there until you choose to take it down or it rots away in a few years. But this is going to be your most stable, your most permanent, and the most expensive and most labor intensive. Obviously, you can buy pre-made raised beds. You can buy metal ones, wood ones. Sometimes the price point is a little prohibitive, but you can just go out and order them on the internet and say, I want this raised bed, and have it delivered to me. You may have to do some light assembly, but they do sell those pre-made and kit versions through a variety of different websites. But these are just 3 different great options as far as different types of raised beds. I have seen them in almost like tires and things like that, and those are okay, but anything that's going to be have rubber and things like that, again, could give you the potential for chemical leaching and things like that. It might be better for using for flower beds or something like that. So then we go to in-ground gardening. Definitely it's I would say some of the most affordable, unless you have to do a lot of treatments. I say less work with question marks. This is going to sound like I'm anti in-ground gardening, and that's really just not true. But it tends to be a lot of work. Not a lot of work. It could be less work, but you do have to do a lot of tilling. You do still have to prepare that bed. And a lot of folks will do a lot of amending, they'll put lime, they'll put fertilizer, they'll put, different things throughout the season. They'll cover it with straw during the winters to keep the soil from eroding. So it works great, like I said, as long as you have the right resources. But it's the way that people have been growing plants from the beginning. It's dug into the ground. The soil surface is not going to be much higher than the rest of the landscape. And then they're using the existing soil. So there's potentially a lot less start work. If it's the first time starting a bed, you'll have to remove sod, probably. You'll have to till it up. And I'm not going to lie, it is a lot of work, especially I live in like a home development area where the ground was very compacted through heavy machinery driving on it and things like that. So it's no joke, man. And there's big boulders and stuff in there. So it's not easy, but it could be less work than the construction and stuff like that comes into the raised beds. Really, as far as like size goes, your only limitation is going to be how much space you have and where your sun hits. But the opportunities are endless. If you're willing to turn a good chunk of your yard into food crops, you can really make as many rows and as much space as you want, as long as you have the sun and the space in your yard for it. There some of the other disadvantages that you might come across. Obviously, we talked about chemicals and knowing what's in your soil. It's a little less accessible because you will have to kneel or crouch or sit on the ground in order to work it. Usually in-ground gardens tend to have more weeds. You can use things like landscape material and then plant between landscape material areas to control weeds, but in-ground gardens tend to have more weeds. So it might just be that, it might be a little bit more work, but a lot less cost. So it's going to be whatever you choose to work that works for you. And then probably the quickest and potentially the most affordable, I don't know, least amount of work would be growing in containers, especially if you have them accessible. You can see in this picture, there's a variety of different containers. There's some ceramic ones. We've got some little square ones down here. There's tabletop ones. Really great use of containers. There's some trellising in the back, but they really kind of fit in any situation. At my house, I do a little bit of everything. I do some in-ground. I have an in-ground cut flower garden that I'm doing on the south-facing side of my house where it gets the most sun. That's in-ground. I grow sunflowers in-ground, squash, and potatoes, nope, pumpkins in ground. And then I grow beans and peas in ground. And then I grow everything else in raised beds. And then I have some pots of tomatoes and things like that, easy access things that I keep on my patio, herbs, stuff that I want to get to easier because the other stuff is out in the back corner of my yard. But containers really fit anywhere. And I think people usually incorporate them into their, even if they do in-ground gardens, they do some in containers as well. They fit in any situation. If you just have a sunny patio, you have low space, you can grow food for sure. It's a great option if you do have unfit soil, because you can pick the specific things that you want and grow just those things in containers. And then they're movable. So if you're a renter, you can grow, whatever you want to grow in pots and then just take them with you when you're done. So containers are really flexible. Now you do have some costs involved with buying the containers and filling them, but it's a smaller quantity of soil, so you will save some money there. And when you're thinking about the soil that you would want, it's going to be a specific container soil or something that has a lot of drainage, because you don't want that water to sit in there. And I'll talk about types of containers here in a minute. I think anyway. The other option, I'll talk about containers really quick here because I think I forgot to add a slide for that, but what type of containers you would want. I mentioned it a little bit when we first looked at this picture, but containers can really be anything. I did mention a little bit about, tires, or you can use baskets. So it's really up to you about what if you are on a budget and you want to just use something that you find. I have some examples of some recycled ones on the next slide. But you can buy any container, and the only real thing you want to think about is that it has drainage, so that the water that you pour into it can trickle out when the soil has absorbed enough. There used to be some hypothesis that you could put rocks in the bottom to help with the drainage, but it really doesn't. The water tends to sit on top of those rocks. Here, I'll turn on my camera so I can show. But if you have a container, let's say this is my container, and you put rocks in the bottom and then you have soil on top. The water, just like it is in my cup, it's going to sit right on top as a layer. It's going to build up as a layer right on top of those rocks. And it's going to make this, the surface tension of the water is going to hold it there. So it's going to have water until you pour way too much water and that pressure pushes it down. It's going to sit on top of those rocks. The surface tension is going to keep it. So you're not really gaining anything by those rocks, because for a while it's going to hold it in that soil and hold it up there. So you want to make sure that you have, and I don't know if I have, this one is a ceramic, but most pots will come with holes drained or poked in the bottom. If it's something like a ceramic pot like this, it might be better for, it will leach some water at the bottom, but it might be better for something like a house plant or something like that that doesn't need a ton of water. But any food crops are going to need a lot of water, because those fruits and vegetables are mainly water. That's mainly what they're made of. So you have to water a ton. And so you want to make sure that your pots are well drained. And that water has somewhere to go if you overwater it. Otherwise, your roots will rot on the inside and it will not get any nutrients or anything to the inside. If you can see a little bit in the back here, we've got some vertical plants growing, but on my next slide, it talks about vertical gardens. I do have some, I think I showed in my first slide, but I have some pots that are mounted to my fence. We also grow squash on a trellis that goes over from the ground to the fence, so that, because things like squash, cucumbers, they take up a lot of space. They're sprawling. So if you want to grow squash, but you don't want to give up your entire yard, think about something like a squash trellis. I wish I included a picture here, but This trellis could be made of just about anything. The ones I have are PVC. But then there's a couple other different examples of vertical gardens. These are a window box that's on someone's patio. This is a whole engineered, it's rebar and pots, and they have it just wide enough so you can set the pots down in there. This looks like it's up against their building or their fence. So it's kind of a combination of container garden and a vertical garden. These are peppers, there's herbs, this is basil, or they might be tomato. I think they're peppers, but tomatoes grow great in containers and grow great vertically. Strawberries are known to grow vertically, but lettuces. So think about that when you're thinking about if you have a space and you're like, oh, well, I have this side of the wall and it gets lots of great sun, there might be a way that you can incorporate a trellis or a vertical garden to kind of maximize some of your space, even if you don't have a lot of it. This is a pallet garden here, and you kind of make these little potting areas inside the pallet so that you can utilize, recycled items. So it's kind of cool. Obviously more recycling here. They're using actual water bottles. These look like lettuces to me. Can't really tell, but you can grow lettuces and stuff like that in there. Obviously these would be something that wouldn't need a lot of root space, or you're not worried about it getting too big, but not everything would work like that, but it's still a really cool way to recycle. How am I doing on time here? Let me just check. 6:30. All right, so then we've got our, say you've decided what you want. You've got, I want a container garden, or I want a raised bed, or, how do you decide what kinds of plants you should grow? Sorry, I'm going to take a drink. So much talking. The number one thing that you should think about when you're trying to decide plants is, what will you use? I love the idea of growing tons and tons of tomatoes because I somehow succeed really well at growing them, but I'm the only one in my house that eats raw tomatoes, which is such a bummer, right? So if your family is like my family and they won't eat raw tomatoes, maybe if you still want to grow tomatoes and you're good at it, you should grow a paste tomato or something that you can. A paste tomato would be a tomato that's made for cooking down into sauce. It's a specific variety that's flesh is really good for roasting or cooking down. So I do that, and I roast my tomatoes at the end of the year, and then I make sauce and things like that with them. But you want to think about what's on your grocery bill. Do you have a lot of fruits? You may want to think about planting an apple tree or something like that in your yard if you have the space for it. I would, like, my kids eat apples like there's an apple shortage coming any moment and they need to eat all of them, but I don't really have the room for an apple tree. So I have to think about the other places where I can, utilize that. So I always grow tomatoes that I can cook with. I grow carrots because my kids do eat carrots. We eat snap peas. I usually will grow some sort of green. This year I'm growing lentil kale that I can cook with and eat in salads. And then, you have to think about, once we decide what you like, well, how much sun do you have? How much space do you have? If you only have a little bit of space, you may not want to use or grow something like a squash that takes up a lot of space, because then you'd be using all of your space for that squash. And it's taking up a lot of your valuable sun space. You might want to think about varieties that there's certain varieties of kale or onions, things like that, that grow better if it's not overly hot. So if you don't have a ton of sun, you might want to look into those kinds of varieties. And then look at what your budget is. You don't want to go big into buying all these plants if you don't have a ton. You might want to look and think about seeds. You might want to look at, we're not too late for seeds. You could still get some seeds and start them for the beginning of the year, but you might want to utilize some more expensive plants and try to grow them from seed, and then maybe purchase some cheaper plants and buy the whole plants and plant them that way. So really think about, be deliberate about how you choose, because one thing that I always used to do is I'd go to the garden center, I just grab whatever I would see. Last year I grabbed, I think it was 8 Brussels sprout plants just because they were there. I don't know why. I had 8 Brussels sprout plants taking up space in my garden when I could have put other valuable things that other people besides me will actually eat. I eat Brussels sprouts. No one else likes them. So really think about how you can maximize your space, especially if you have limited space. So that's going to be your number one concern. If you're a novice gardener, if you haven't done a lot of gardening, you might want to consider a hybrid plant that's an easy grow variety or something like that. You might want to really kind of do a little research into the climate that seeds come from, or the type of climate that the plants come from. But think about those when you're thinking about hybrids and stuff like that. When you're looking at plants, there's a lot of different categories. So there might have a hybrid, there might be an heirloom variety, there might be organic. And those are all just categories that plants fall in. Doesn't mean they're good or bad. An heirloom variety means that the seeds and the plant has existed for generations. Maybe it came from a First Nations group in our country, maybe it came from a First Nations group in Canada, but the seeds have been saved from the same varieties of plants year after year for generations. So that would be what makes them an heirloom. Organic would mean that everything from the soil to the plant to anything that was used on the plant is organic, is made chemical free. So think about that. And then hybrid would mean that a couple of different plants were combined, the best traits from those plants were combined to make a new plant that is either hardier as in like better growing or more tolerant of weather. So a lot of times hybrids, I think people think of GMOs or genetically modified organisms are always really bad, but a genetically modified organism is just the best traits that were picked from each thing, and they were spliced together with science. Now there are GMOs that are bad and they're bad for the environment, but all hybrids are literally plants that the best features from each species were combined into making a new plant that has the best traits from both. So just think about that when you're looking. If you're thinking about how do I know if it's a hybrid, usually on the plant's tag, it'll say VAR, which means variety. That's going to mean that it's a variant of that plant. That means it's a hybrid of some kind. I'm going to take us on a little journey here through the extension website. Hope everyone can still see that. And these are fruits, if you're thinking about what kind of fruits, these are small crops, small fruit crops. And this is, I just kind of wanted to show you this resource. We're not going to go through every variety, but this is the extension website. And these are small fruit species that are known to grow well in Illinois. It'll talk about what their pH ranges for their soils would be, or, suggested cultivars. A cultivar is again like a variety, a variation. In order of ripening would mean when the fruit, how early it bears fruit. So these are going to be varieties that do really well in Illinois that are recommended by the extension. So if you go to the extension website and you search small fruits, or you Google University of Illinois Extension small fruit crops, that's how you get there. You know what? I'll drop it in the chat. So that way, I've lost my Zoom window. There we go. I will put this in the, I don't know how to chat from here. I'll have to get there eventually. There it is. Sorry, you guys are hearing my brain processes. So I'll throw that in the chat. You guys can save that if you'd like. And then this is a fruit. The extension has a similar one for fruit trees. It gives you a little guide on how to grow them, some good varieties, different soil requirements, things like that. So the extension does a really great job, and I will throw this one also in the chat. And you guys can keep that if you would like. And then I also have one for vegetables, but the extension is just a really great resource for plants in general, and how to grow them and when to grow them and where to grow them. And they have, and lots of volunteers have done a great job maintaining these directories over the years. So then you can go look at vegetables, and I again will throw this one also in the chat, but this one is a little bit different. Where is it going? There it is. In that the vegetable directory, you can look at it by picture. So even if you're not 100% familiar with every fruit and vegetable that exists in the grocery store, this has a nice image. These are going to be some of your most common ones. Maybe not every variety that you ever want to grow is there, but this is a good starting spot. if you're a novice gardener and you haven't really gotten out there very much. So let's go to one that's maybe a little more common than beets. Like, let's look at carrots. Lots of people like carrots. Not a lot of people, not everyone likes beets. So it's going to break it down by the recommended varieties. If you're looking for small, round, baby carrots, these kind of, I grow Nantes carrots. They're going to be a medium-sized carrot. And then, you know, it goes on from there, and then they'll have your planting instructions and things like that. So that's going to be a great resource for you if you haven't gardened before. So both these pages would be great for in-ground or container gardening folks, or I'm sorry, in-ground or raised bed gardening folks. But then container gardening folks, and it looks like we've got someone in the chat here. Oh, okay. Yes, Donna was just reminding everyone that you can definitely put your questions in the chat. I am just speaking into the void, so I love when the void sends me questions that I can speak back to, which is nice. If you are thinking about what plants to select for container gardens, these are going to be things that don't require a lot of space. I think that's kind of self-explanatory, but there are a lot of varieties of plants. Like I talked about growing paste tomatoes. Well, what I found last year is that Burpee has a Roma tomato variety that is specifically dwarfed. It has smaller tomatoes and it's a smaller growing plant and grows really, really great. It's almost like bigger than a cherry tomato, a little bigger than a cherry tomato, but they're the roasting kind of tomatoes that make really good pasta sauce. So I had really great luck growing those last year. I'm not even going to grow standard sized tomatoes this year. I'm only growing container sized tomatoes, even in my raised beds, because I love them so much. So that's a great example of a variety or cultivar that is meant for a container. So really, look at the variety. A lot of times, hardware stores or garden centers are specifically going to mark something as dwarfed or container sized or things like that, or just ask and they would give you some good suggestions. But also make sure that wherever you have your containers, you're going to have the light requirements for what you want to grow. Tomatoes and things like that require a lot of sun. The sun is what's going to give the leaves the ability to make the energy to make the fruits and vegetables. So making sure that you have that sun is how the plant is going to be able to grow fruits and vegetables. And then a quick note on herbs, because herbs grow really well in containers. They can perform really well in full sun, a little bit of shade, kinds of things. Obviously, like I said before, they just won't be as prolific if they are in partial shade. But most herbs will do great, because some people will even bring their containers in during the late fall, winter, and early spring and keep them inside over the winter and then put them back out in the summer again. So think about that when you're thinking about the plants. It might be that you can just bring it inside without too much of a shock and keep it going year after year. We have a lime tree that we do that with. We bring it inside for the winter and put it out when it gets nice and warm. Am I out of? No, I'm not. Well, that was my last kind of slide about, fruits, vegetables, and containers. Container plants. I'll talk really quick while people are thinking if they have questions about the extension. I am an extension volunteer. All of us are volunteers. And we do these programs because we love to teach people about gardening and about plants and we have people that teach about birds and we have master naturalists as well. So this is the Flagship program of the University of Illinois Extension. We have a location in every county. We have a joint one with Bureau, LaSalle, Marshall, and Putnam. I'm part of the LaSalle one that's based in Ottawa. All the websites on the page will give you more information about the programs. We run both online and in person. Well, not in person now, obviously, but online training to learn how to be a master gardener or a master naturalist. Our LaSalle office is located in Ottawa. We also have offices in Princeton, Henry, and then there's a unit office at IVCC in Oglesby, but that is more for business, not actual volunteerism and things like that. If you are interested in any of those programs, you can ask me any questions about them. But Meg Overrocker is our coordinator. That's her email and phone number on the screen, and she can get you set up with a program if you are interested. I didn't see any more questions, which is totally okay. No pressure.
I have a question for you, Natalie.
Good. Great, Donna. I can always depend on you.
Well, there you go. Actually, and I wanted to tell everybody that the chat links will be featured along with this recording on the website, library's website by tomorrow. And also on there is the recording of Natalie's prior program about starting seeds. And since it's not too late and you might want to start a few seeds, you want to check that program. It's available on the library's website. So just a reminder on that. I have actually two questions for you. One has to do with the fruit, like strawberries and raspberries. Now, raspberries, and you're talking to the novice gardener, as you know. And so raspberries are bushes, correct?
Yes.
And I need to start those as bushes.
Yep.
I mean, I know they started as seeds somewhere, but probably not in my hands.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that I need to have bushes. And can you tell me about what raspberries need in terms of they have to have more than one of them. They have to have a bunch. And how long does it take to grow before they bear fruit? How many years?
So we grow blackberries, which are going to be similar to raspberries, you know, in how they grow. And usually, and it depends on your varietal, but you'll want at least two plants because you'll usually want a male and a female, or at least the opportunity to have male and female flowers. And so having more than one, I mean, I've had, you can sometimes grow, because sometimes depending on your varietal, they have male and female flowers on the same shrub, but it takes usually about 2 years to bear fruit. What will happen with, my blackberries are bonkers, and I can send you a picture, Donna, but you have your shrub, your main shrub, and then in that second year, these gigantic arms, like arm vines, will reach out, and that's going to be your main shrub in the future. So you've had this starter shrub, and then these new like almost vine arms, and you can control them, and you can tether them, and you can kind of make them look how you want and prune them. But mine are very brambly because I didn't do that. And I was like, I want to see how big they'll get. They'll get very big. So you can get dwarf varieties. There are container blueberries, there's container raspberries that are dwarfed. Mine are evidently not that variety. But usually it'll about take 2 to 3 years, depending on your varietal, to get actual berries. We planted ours 2 years ago. And last year we did get some berries towards the end of the season, but they are like these like morphed small ones at the beginning, and they should turn into full berries next year.
Okay.
So it's a long game. You have to be patient.
Okay. That's okay. I can do that. And should I plant them just out someplace in full sun away from a building?
Yeah, although I mean, there are raspberries that grow well in partial shade. Like you'll see them just growing in ditches and hedgerows and things like that. So they are pretty tolerant, and they can really survive just about anything. You know, they grow in Illinois. So, but yeah, put them somewhere where if they get a little crazy, it's not going to bug you, and they can get thorny. So keep that in mind as well. So wherever you're going to put them, unless you get a thornless variety, you'll want to have them that not be a nuisance to you, because they will get thorny.
Okay. And I see we have some questions in the chat. Why don't we go there next?
Yes. Do onions grow well in Illinois? Pot, ground, or raised is better? Now, I have grown onions in a raised bed, and I've grown onions in the ground. I have never grown onions in a pot. I would assume you can, but onions and garlic, and not leeks as much, but onions and garlic usually like to have a cold period. So they do better when they're in the ground. So like you would plant them in the fall, and they would be ready in the early summer. So keep that in mind. So a lot of times people will put them in the ground or the raised bed because they will get that cold period that will allow them to grow properly. And that sometimes is just maximizing the season. You can plant them mid-season and harvest them later, but they just tend to not be as, they don't like the hot as much. So a lot of times I would say ground or raised bed for onions. You'll want full sun. 6 to 8 hours of sun for onions. If Christina, that question was for the same onion question. But yeah, you can grow them in a raised bed without a problem. Anything that is like a carrot or something that grows in the ground, and you want to make sure it's going to get nice and big, you want to make sure that your raised bed is providing you enough space. I have 6-inch tall raised beds currently. I am going to be building some deeper ones, but so my 6-inch tall raised beds grow like baby carrot sized. But what happens, especially with carrots, is they'll hit the ground, the hard ground underneath, or the water barrier or whatever, and they'll either start pushing themselves out of the ground, or they'll get malformed at the bottom because they're trying to grow, and they'll end up growing sideways, and they'll do some crazy things. So things like onions and things like that, if you are going to plant them in a raised bed, just make sure that you have a nice deep raised bed that will give them plenty of space to grow.
Okay, and I encourage everybody to post their questions while I'm asking mine. I have a strawberry question also. I'm thinking containers for the strawberries. Do you think that's better than trying to put them in the raised beds, or does it matter?
The only thing about putting strawberries in a container is you'll want to bring them either into your garage or into your basement or something in the winter. My strawberries are in a raised bed, and I have had luck with them coming back year after year that way. This is now my 5th year of growing the same strawberry plants and them coming back, and they're still productive. A lot of people will say that your strawberries are not as productive if you grow them that way, but we haven't really had a problem and they've continued to grow. But if you're in a container, what's going to happen is they're going to get too cold because they won't have that ground insulating them, or the soil insulating them from the elements. So if you do have a container, you'll just want to bring it inside to your garage or something to keep it semi-protected during the winter. But then they should be able to grow again. But they do grow really well in containers. And you can even get those, they have those upside down topsy-turvy ones where you can have them hang down from like the upside down container, like hanging baskets, which are pretty cool.
So, okay, so let me just let everyone know that you are no worse a novice than I am with this next question. So when I bring them in the garage, do I have to water them over the winter, or does that just freeze them?
They will go into like a dormancy. So like you'll want to wait until their leaves have started to kind of brown and things like that, and they'll start to go into their own dormancy, and they should not need to be watered. And then you can bring them back out when it's going to be above, freezing, and then you'll want to start watering them when they start to green out again. But you should not have to water them over the winter.
Okay.
As long as they're in your garage. If they're going to be in your basement or inside of your house and you're not going to have them go into that dormancy, then yeah, you'll want to water them because they're going to still continue to try to produce leaves and stuff like that.
Okay. Now, and I see that I still have the floor here, so I will ask one more question.
Sure.
As you know, I have horses, so I have my ready-made manure pile that we turn, and we do it over the course of the year. And then that's our manure for the next year's garden. But it occurred to me just a few minutes ago that we do, as the process of good horse care, worm our horses with, ivermectin, among other things. And so I quickly dashed off to look at Cornell, and I have this incredibly long printout that I haven't read yet. You have an idea if that biodegrades in the compost pile, and then I can go ahead and use it on a food crop?
Off of the top of my head, I'm not sure. A lot of times when you're buying, store-bought manure, they're going to be testing it. They're going to be testing it for toxins, things like that. I'm not sure what your dog parents are like, but we have like a depository for dog poop and things like that we kind of have this like active compost pile. We don't use that compost for our food crops because, or we do, but for like pumpkins, things like that, we're not going to eat. Because there can be things like E. coli and things like that. So any compost that you're using for food crops or manure needs to either be heat treated or chemically, have some sort of process. A lot of times they'll just spread it out in the sun until it gets to a certain temperature, and then they'll be able to test it for things like E. coli and things like that. So just kind of think about that. And it may be worthwhile to just see if there's a place that might test your manure pile for you. But if it's a turning process and you've had it out in the cold and it's gotten shocked with the cold and then shocked with the heat, it might have killed the E. coli bacteria. Okay.
And again, we don't, nothing with dog. This would just be horse.
Yes. Right. Yeah. I'm unfortunately not familiar with horse manure and the, like how that I would hope that the chemical of like a deworming the quantity would not be harmful to humans once it's down. But again, I wouldn't be able to speak with any sort of authority.
Yeah, and like I said, I think there's a good article on Cornell. I just haven't gone through it yet. And I
Yeah.
was wondering if you just knew. Okay, it looks like we have some more questions.
This is the number one gardener problem, is it not? How do you keep rabbits and deer from eating your plants? The only thing that I have ever found is physical barriers. And that, that's going to be more for rabbits. I do keep like a chicken wire fence around my certain, they don't really care about all of them, but like my lettuces and things like that, things that are easy for them to eat. I keep a chicken wire barrier around it. Now it does make it harder to weed in those specific raised beds. If you get a high enough raised bed, this is okay. So we'll talk raised beds and then I'll talk about in ground and containers. Raised beds, if you get a high enough raised bed, the rabbits will 18 inches or so, they won't be able to get into it. Now deer, the barrier would have to be, on top of it. Some people will put a wire cage across the top, or they'll put in a fence around their whole area to kind of discourage the deer from coming. I don't live in an area where there are very many deer, so I don't have that big of a problem with deer, but I do have a problem with rabbits. And so when you have an in-ground garden, sometimes people will put like an electric barrier. Sometimes they will put, like a chicken wire that they wouldn't, like high enough chicken wire that they would be discouraged from jumping in. And then they would have a fenced access for the human people to get in. And then containers, you just want to make it inaccessible. It's a nice thing about containers. You can move it around. If it's on your patio, a lot of times deer will not come up that far. Rabbits won't be able to get into them. But unfortunately, if you do live out in the country where you do, or in an area where you do have a lot of deer coming through, they are definitely going to be a big pest. So physical barriers are the biggest thing. I've heard people have had luck with like spraying like a soapy water or like a concentrate that's got water or hot sauce or things like that to make things distasteful. And then those would be able to be washed off very easily when you harvest your crops, and you would just wash it off in your sink and wouldn't affect you. So there are some like things you can spray on that are not harmful to humans. They're not chemicals. They're just like soap mixtures that you can do for that. So just kind of do a little Googling, but I think physical barriers are the number one thing to keep out, which again is another expense and more work, but it's, that's it. It is what it is.
I imagine you could make easy, 1x1 or 1x2 frames and just do them in short panels, maybe 4 feet. And then you just, you could zip tie them or whatever, and then take them apart when you want access.
Yeah. So what I have around each of my 4x4 bins is I just took like a spool of the 3-foot high chicken wire, and I wrap like vertically so it stands up like a fence, and I wire tie that together. So, but then I have to reach down into it to weed and things like that. So it's not the most accessible. If you're somebody that has a mobility issue, it would not work for you. But yeah, I have seen where you then take the wood and you spread it around the whole area, and then you can just either, have an area that unhooks so that you can get in or whatever. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to consider, but those tomatoes certainly looked excellent.
Donna, I think every time we talk, I give you more work.
Well, I went and got seeds to start, and I couldn't help myself. I think I bought everything. So,
well, I actually just did my 6-week seeds this past weekend. And I think total we have between cut flowers and food crops, we have over 100 seedlings that we have we are attempting. So obviously not all of those little seed babies will make it, but hopefully, we'll at least get some out of there.
Well, I'll let you know what my bounty looks like.
I'll update you guys. I believe, I was going to look it up for you guys. The first Cook Your Own is going to be in April.
Okay.
And that one, the Cook Your Own, I was just going to pull it up on my calendar, and of course it's gone.
I'm pulling it up on my calendar here.
Is it Tuesday the 13th, Donna?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Tuesday the 13th at 6 o'clock, and we are growing your own beverage.
beverage gardens. So that's going to be, you know, herbs and different things like that that you could use to make mocktails or lemonades or things like that. So that you can, we'll talk a little bit about syrups that you could make from things in your garden as well. So hoping to do some hands-on demonstrations as well as a little bit of just, you know, talking about the specific plants themselves.
Well, we're looking forward to it, Natalie.
Great. Well, it's nice to see everybody. Well, not see everybody. You saw me. I didn't see you, but it's nice to spend time with you guys tonight, and we'll see you in a month or so.
And it's nice to talk gardening, even though there's still a little bit of white stuff on the ground.
Yeah, I think we finally got rid of it all just this evening, but yeah, I can still see it on people's roofs, but it's coming, everybody. It'll be here soon enough.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and thank you everyone for joining us. And with that, I'll say good night, and I will be ending the program. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.